I wanna shelter you, but with the beast inside, there's nowhere we can hide. No matter what we bring.
No way, Tom. Great to see you, Tom.
Oh, Frank. How's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, no problem.
So, folks, as Willie mentioned, we're joined by a special guest, Tom Maddock. Tom, why don't you explain to the folks at home what PTSD means?
I'd love to, Frank. PTSD is one of many ways that individuals can react to trauma. It is the manifestation of trauma through physical changes in the body, particularly in the nervous system. There are a few common symptoms typically associated with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
These include intrusive symptoms, hypervigilance or hyperarousal symptoms, and avoidance/numbing symptoms. These three categories make up what we typically in the industry call post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's great. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, no problem. Not everybody that experiences a traumatic event will develop PTSD. In fact, only between 7 and 10% of individuals exposed to trauma develop PTSD at some point in their life.
Research shows that between 7 to 10% of individuals exposed to trauma develop PTSD. Although most people recover after psychological trauma, it is not uncommon for people to develop PTSD, and about 9.7% of Canadian women and 3.6% of Canadian men will develop PTSD in their lifetime. You'll notice that women are usually twice as many as men to develop it. So Tom, in terms of defining PTSD in a clinical setting, I'm wondering, what does the DSM have to say about PTSD?
Well, the DSM lists 7 criteria that are required for the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Criteria A, or the first criteria, is the individual must have experienced a traumatic event. Now, this is an exposure to actual or threatened death, or a threat to someone's physical integrity, they experience serious injury, or sexual violation. But as you can see, this criteria leaves out many events one would typically consider traumatic. For example, cyberbullying. No one doubts the traumatic potential for cyberbullying. However, under the DSM-5, this is not considered a traumatic event.
Okay. Tom, I'm really excited to hear more about Criteria A, and I'm sure the folks at home are as well.
Well, I'm really excited to tell you guys more about it. Criteria A also says that an individual must either have directly experienced a traumatic event, or they have witnessed a traumatic event in person, or they've learned about a traumatic event occurring to a close friend or family member.
Okay, so how does this definition of PTSD in the DSM-4-TR compare to the new one?
Well, the DSM-5 now includes sexual violation as a traumatic event. This is incredibly important because research indicates that 1 in 4 women will be raped in their lifetime, and 1 in 3 girls will be sexually abused as children. Furthermore, the new criteria allows for police officers and first responders who are repeatedly exposed to details of traumatic events to receive a PTSD diagnosis.
So earlier you mentioned that there was 3 diagnostic clusters associated with PTSD, but I've heard that there's a 4th one now. I'm wondering if you can explain to the viewers what that's about.
Absolutely. There have been some exciting new changes to the DSM criteria for PTSD. Originally, there were the 3 symptom clusters that I described. Not originally, but in the DSM-4, there was those 3 criteria that I already described: avoidance, numbing, hyperarousal, and intrusive symptoms. Well, now they've included a 4th cluster, which includes negative cognitions and moods.
Okay, so you mentioned that a person must go through criterion A, which is the experience of a traumatic event in some way. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the other criteria. For instance, what other sort of symptoms would a person have with PTSD?
Well, the next criterion, criterion B, is the presence of what we call intrusive symptoms. These symptoms include flashbacks, nightmares, or really distressing, intrusive memories about the event. Criterion C describes the next cluster of symptoms that must be present for a PTSD diagnosis.
Okay.
These are the avoidance or numbing symptoms.
What would that look like?
This symptom cluster includes behavioral aspects in which the individual avoids reminders of the traumatic event. This can lead to incredibly restricted lifestyles.
Yeah.
Furthermore, this includes dissociation, and the various levels of dissociation that can accompany traumatic experience.
Wow. So what's criterion D?
Well, criterion D is these exciting new changes to the DSM-5
Okay.
over the DSM-4TR.
Sure.
And in order for an individual to meet criterion D, they must show two symptoms that are examples of negative alterations in cognitions and mood.
Right.
Yeah. So symptoms that qualify as negative alterations in cognitions and mood include self-blame, really intense blame of others, inability to feel positive emotions, shame, horror, guilt, negative emotions such as that, inability to feel any satisfaction from activities that they previously enjoyed. So all of those, that pretty broad range of symptoms fall under criterion D.
Wow, it sounds like they've really expanded a lot to this area.
Yeah, they have. And it's really exciting.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Yeah,
Very exciting.
super exciting.
So thanks for explaining criterion D, this new and exciting change to PTSD in the DSM-5. I'm wondering if you can go through criterion E. What does that look like?
I can go through criterion E. It's really exciting stuff. Criterion E includes symptoms that signify a marked alteration in an individual's arousal and reactivity. This typically includes what we would consider a fight or flight response, when an individual has difficulty suppressing emotional outbursts or anger. They have an increased startle response. Individuals that have sleep disturbances, inability to concentrate or focus, those kind of things. They need two or more symptoms that can be considered marked alterations in arousal and reactivity.
Okay. Thanks a lot for explaining the 4 criteria now in the DSM-5.
Yeah, no problem.
So Tom, how long do these symptoms actually have to persist?
Well, that's actually criterion F.
Oh.
Yeah, they must persist for at least 1 month. Now, that's not necessarily the first month after the traumatic event. Sometimes there's what we call a delayed trauma or delayed stress reaction to a traumatic event. So, if an individual is experiencing those 4 symptom clusters for over a month, they may be eligible for PTSD diagnosis. However, the final criterion, and 7th and final criterion, is that they experience these symptoms and they have what we call clinically significant distress or impairment. So they not only have to feel these symptoms, but the symptoms must have the intensity necessary to result in clinically significant distress or impairment. Presence of these symptoms alone is not enough, but intensity is also needed as well. So, Frank, I was just wondering, for the people at home, if you could briefly summarize the 7 criteria. Okay, I'll do it. Criterion A is that they experience a traumatic event. Criterion B is the presence of intrusive symptoms. Criterion C is they feel the avoidance or numbing symptoms. Criterion D is the marked alteration in, it's negative cognition or mood states, alterations. The next criterion, or criterion E, is the hyperarousal symptom cluster. F is the persistence of these symptoms for over a month. And G is clinically significant distress or impairment.
Very good. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Perfect. So now hopefully everyone has a very clear understanding of what PTSD is and what their assessments are essentially looking for.
And thank you for explaining the new DSM-5 requirements too. That's really helpful for brand new clinicians out there.
Yeah, I was really excited to do that.
Yeah, that was very exciting for me too.
Did you say Paul?
PTSD is highly prevalent in the armed forces population. Approximately 7.2% of Canadian force members will develop PTSD in their lifetime, and a whopping 39% of U.S. male combat veterans experience PTSD in their lifetime. This is according to the National Morbidity Survey.
Saigon. Shit. I'm still only in Saigon. Every time I think I'm gonna wake up back in the jungle. When I was home after my first tour, it was worse. I'd wake up and there'd be nothing. I hardly said a word to my wife until I said yes to a divorce. When I was here, I wanted to be there. When I was there, all I could think of was getting back into the jungle. I'm here a week now. Waiting for a mission. Getting softer. Every minute I stay in this room, I get weaker. And every minute Charlie squats in the bush, he gets stronger. Each time I looked around, the walls moved in a little tighter.
So you mentioned that PTSD is one way in which trauma can manifest itself. I'm wondering if there's some other DSM diagnoses related to trauma, and if you could explain those for the folks at home.
Absolutely. There's really high comorbidity with PTSD and other DSM diagnoses. For instance, PTSD is commonly also associated with many anxiety disorders, major depressive disorder, eating disorders, bipolar disorder. Also, in a study of individuals diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a very, very high percentage of those individuals were exposed to trauma at a young age.
Well, thanks for explaining that.
You're welcome. I was really excited to explain.
And 89% of men and 79% of women have a comorbid disorder with PTSD. Well, Tom, thanks a lot for coming out. Really appreciate all the stuff you taught us today about PTSD.
It was a really exciting experience.
It was exciting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Tom Maddock, folks. Yeah, if you want to look him up, you can find him. He's out there somewhere.
I'm out there.
Okay, see you soon.